So hello, a very warm welcome to a new conversation in our series, Creative Bureaucracy Festival Meets Science. I'm Julia Stamm and I direct the Creative Bureaucracy Festival. The CBF, the Creative Bureaucracy Festival, wants to put the spotlight on outstanding innovations in the public sector and on the creative change makers behind them from around the world. We also want to contribute to thriving interactions between our bureaucracies and other sectors in society. If we want to find solutions to our pressing problems, these interactions are key. And in the context of this year's Berlin Science Week, we want to take a closer look at the interactions between policymaking and science. So how can we make sure that scientific findings and recommendations reach our administrations and our public offices in a way that they really make a difference? With our interview series, Creative Bureaucracy Festival Meets Science, we invite leading experts from a broad range of backgrounds to share their thoughts on the relationship between the public sector and science. And today, I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome the wonderful Lisa Witter. Lisa is the CEO of the Apolitical Foundation and co-founder of Apolitical, a global peer-to-peer learning platform used by more than 180,000 public servants in 170 countries. And it was named one of Fast Company's most innovative companies in the world. The Apolitical Foundation is a not-for-profit founded by Apolitical to advance the revitalization of democracy by building better policies. And we'll talk about that, Lisa. The foundation's keystone project, Apolitical Academy Global, helps prepare a new generation of transformational political leaders via a network of non-partisan political training academies. Lisa is a former public servant with deep experience in gender and behavioral science and has founded numerous political training academies over the last 25 years. Among Lisa's many, many accomplishments, board memberships, and awards, let me highlight just one. In 2020, Lisa was awarded the Creative Bureaucracy Award. To me, Lisa really is the incarnation of what we want to achieve with the CBF, namely to bring innovation and new ways of thinking and doing to the public sector. Dear Lisa, a very warm welcome.
Thank you very much. And I do want to say the acknowledgement of myself and my co-founder, Robin Scott of the Apolitical company, being named, getting this award from you all was really important to us. And I think why it was maybe one of the most important awards I've ever gotten. And why is because I think this work of making governance, government, politics, fit for the 21st century, it's not sexy work. It's not work that is going to be mainstream. It's not work that's going to be talked about at the kitchen table. If anything, people talk about these things when they complain about it. And so being recognized for doing unsexy hard work is I really appreciate it. And it's one of the reasons I love that you are the Creative Bureaucracy Festival. Like, this can be fun and creative. We can do this in different ways. So big gratitude to you and the team for the acknowledgement.
That's really great. Thank you, Lisa. And talking about not sexy work, when you hear the words creative bureaucracy, what does it mean to you?
I see people carefully doing things new in government. And I say that is because one of the things I've learned in the last maybe decade, working very closely with bureaucrats, including when I was one, that was way more than a decade ago, is that there's been this buzzword around innovation. And I think innovation is good. But I do think that there are some old things that we can just kind of do better or more creatively. And so there's this desire to move to what is new instead of saying, hey, look, we need structures, we need processes. How might we look at them in different ways and be creative about it? So that's what I like about the Creative Bureaucracy Festival. It's celebratory. It's putting people at the center. Any good movement or change has people in the center. Those are the bureaucrats. And it reclaims the word, and it makes it creative. It gives you some opportunity to use the other side of your brain that isn't the law and process and policy, but it's the how and the who and the magic of how to do good governance.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that you spoke about innovation and the term innovation. I had another of our interviews with Tommy Laito, who is one of the Bloomberg Innovation Fellows, and we also discussed innovation not always meaning to absolutely create something new, but to always rethink about things that might have worked in the past and that might also be used in a different context. So thank you really for bringing that up again. Let's talk a little bit about the work that you're doing with the Apolitical Foundation. You want to foster, and I read this on your website, a new generation of transformational political leaders. So do we need new types of political leaders? Do we need new types of bureaucrats, Lisa?
Well, I want to say that I think, just starting off, bridging from what you said before, I think there are great people in the system already. There's no doubt about that. And part of what we do in our kind of two-legged approach is we do work with existing politicians. How we do that is we offer up Apolitical, the learning platform, to them. They are bureaucrats in a particular way too. I mean, they are public leaders. And like one of the courses we have is how to use evidence in policymaking, which, just back to, this is Science Week, and so science is evidence. So we think it's really important to provide pathways for existing politicians to use evidence and to learn more how to use science and how to use data and the new tools, and how things like AI might be disrupting how we think about doing politics and policy. The work that we're doing at the Apolitical Foundation, besides supporting existing great people in the system, is really building bridges from outside of politics into politics to not only diversify like what people look like and what backgrounds they come from, because that's important in a polis to have really representative democracy. We know, Julia, you and I have talked about how underrepresented women of all types are in politics. It's the largest gender gap we have in the World Economic Forum Gender Gap Index. I think it's 125 years before we reach parity. And we've actually done a really good job in closing some of those gaps in education and health. And politics is the final frontier of doing that. And why that's so important is it's those who have political power get to help facilitate and make agendas. And so building bridges from communities, underrepresented communities. One of our partners in all of this works to get more Native Americans elected in the United States. Just a little note on that. There are 560,000 elected positions in the United States. To achieve parity for the number of Native Americans who live in the United States, we need to elect 17,000 Native Americans, and currently we have 200. So there's a lot more work, intentional work, to get new people, but we just don't want anyone. We want people who sort of have that 21st century mindset. I mean, one thing we say a lot is that we have 18th century politics and 19th century governments with 20th century technology and 21st century opportunities and challenges. And we just need new and different people with much more intention. And frankly, it's quite interesting. I've been in the political space for a very, very, very long time. And there's not a lot of training and intentionality that goes into selecting candidates. It's like, who can get elected or who's going to raise their hand? And obviously there's skills and attributes. So we're really trying to just add more kind of crunchy thinking about who gets sort of recruited, how they get trained and supported, and how do we continue to support them once they're in.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, several times, right, the contribution of new people, new kinds of leaders, also for our democracies. And we all know that democracies are, under threat. So I was wondering whether we could talk a little more about the role of science for, empowering democracy and maybe also revitalizing democracy. How does this also inform the work that you're doing?
It massively informs the work. The one little counterintuitive that I want the listeners to think about is just back to democracy being where we're at it. I just become friends with Eche, who wrote this book, How to Lose a Country, The 7 Steps from Democracy to Dictatorship. And what's really,
again, Lisa?
Yeah, it's how to Lose a Country, The 7 Steps from Democracy to Dictatorship. Mm-hmm. And her second book is Together, sort of what do we need to do from this? And it is really true that liberal democracy is really being threatened. I do think talking about the problem over and over again with not highlighting what to do about it is a real challenge. And whenever we know, what we do know, when things come under attack, there also is an opportunity to reemerge in a different future. And so a lot of what we think about is, what is the status quo and how might that be sort of dipping down? This is from a guy named Bill Sharp's Patterning of Hope. So he looks at how change happens and what are the innovations to improve democracy. And a lot of that has to do with science, like looking at science and I'm particularly interested in behavioral science and neuroscience and how that informs how we think about democracy. So I spend a lot of time in that space. I'm incorporating that into our work. So you go from status quo to innovation to the emerging future. And when we talk about sort of how democracy is under attack, and it is, there's no doubt, we need to also be holding that place in our minds, which is why I love Creative Bureaucracy Festival too, about how do we reimagine, how do we reimagine what things could be? I mean, there are limitations to liberal democracy. Not everyone feels included in it. Change happens very quickly, and that hurts some people's brains. So if democracy is being threatened, you have to ask, is there an opportunity to improve it and move from the despair to the opportunity space? I'm not saying being optimistic or pessimistic, just if you're going to have limited energy, recognize where people are at, but just saying it over and over again without providing some dreaming space, I think it's difficult. And that's what we do with politicians and aspiring politicians. Like, okay, people don't like it, then what do we want? Like, we get to co-create what this looks like. And like I said, we think a lot about neuroscience. Just one little thing I want to share with you. I was listening to an amazing interview with David Byrne, who, if people don't know who David Byrne is, depending on your age, he's from the Talking Heads, just incredible music. And he was really struck by sort of how our brain works. And he started sort of studying it more and more. And he found a study that showed that when they showed average people two different political candidates that were running against one another, they had to, and that they didn't know them. They didn't know who they were. These weren't people that you would know. They would guess with 70% accuracy, and maybe even 80% accuracy, who would win just based off the name and the picture of the people. So it just tells you how irrational human beings are. And I don't want to say, oh, isn't that horrible? It just is something that's the case. So I think about the irrationality that humans have and built that into our work. And politicians need to too. You can't just throw facts at people. They need stories. There's a science of storytelling. So for us, I am like nose down into the science and building bridges from the scientific findings. In fact, we just launched, and maybe in the show notes we can share this, 51 political scientists whose work really helped shape the future of politicians. And I think this is important. Like, go to the hard science, go to the social science, go to all of it. It can really inform us. Know the limitations of it, right? It can be biased, it can be too global north focused. Understand that, but don't start from nothing. Start from where some of the science is. And I geek out on this stuff every day with joy, because I think that's where we need to go.
Great. Let's dive deeper into this. We spoke a little bit about your work and also how you use science, and I really love the idea of bringing in, for instance, behavioral sciences into the game. How do you see the relationship between science and policymaking more in general, Lisa? And how important do you think science is for public sector decision making?
The last probably 6 years, I have been deeply involved and co-chairing something for the World Economic Forum called the Agile Governance Council. And basically what that is, it's a group of us from the private sector, the public sector, and some NGOs, academics, that basically try to answer the question, with all of this new science and technology entering the public sphere, what role does government play in regulating or not regulating scientific innovation? So everything from biotech to AI, these are very material questions, like self-driving cars, mRNA vaccines, all of this. And what I find, this is just a fact, like these things are happening. The place that I've been really focused on is, if you can follow me visually, you have the external forces of science coming in, the technological forces of science coming in. And then on the far side, you have a high precautionary principle, which says stop that from happening, to a low precautionary principle, right? Which is like, let it happen and see what happens. I think the role of government and governance is that middle section where you try to decide, how do we make the decisions about what to do with science? Science is moving so quickly that the regulator can't sit there and be like, this is good, this is bad. It's too complex, right? There's too much stuff behind the hood. And so we've needed more public-private partnership in every way, academics, businesses, citizens, all of that. And what we're doing is try to help more toolkits come into place so that there's more collaboration in figuring this out, so that deciding how to regulate and develop policies isn't some black box that is either only in government or completely hijacked by corporations, but really is a much more citizen participatory, expert participatory process. So science is great, maybe, it could be bad. But what we have to do in government is be facilitators of democracy to decide what to do with that. That's not someone in their ivory tower deciding, that's bringing more voices of expertise together. So that is my kind of message, I think, during where science meets the creative bureaucracies is where are good processes, this is where the boring stuff, bureaucracy, that is inclusive, that helps make those good decisions so we get the better outcomes.
I think one of the things that you mentioned when you were just speaking, Lisa, is namely that science is so complex and the policymaking cycles are very different and policymakers function very differently and also need other things, in order to take their decisions. It's a very important one. How do you look at the role of intermediaries, sort of translate scientific finding for policymakers? And maybe also when we think about some sort of trainings for policymakers to better understand science and scientific processes and what you can expect and cannot expect from science and scientists to deliver. I was wondering whether you could maybe elaborate a little bit on this.
Sure. On the second one, I've been thinking a lot about this. All of us come into politics and policy within our own context and experience. So, I'm married to an aeronautical engineer who thinks about the scientific process all the time. Like you just hang out with them and like, that's how it is. If I was married to a baker, I don't know if we'd be talking about the scientific process all the time, right? So like thinking about science and the process of it and attribution, all of these causal versus correlative, all of these sort of things are regular in my life, right? And so but not every politician or policymaker has that. And so at Apolitical, that's some of the work that we're trying to do is how do you upskill yourself on the basics that you're almost embarrassed to ask, right? Like, just for example, we're sitting here in Berlin, my God, the science curriculum for kids is so much better here than it is in the United States, right? So like base level of different places around the world. So I think the biggest thing that we need to do is really create and nurture inside of our governments this growth mindset and to take away the shame that you don't know everything all the time and to be committed to lifelong learning. And particularly for politicians, I mean, I'll tell you, I work a lot on climate and I'll talk to some politicians who will make some statements or decisions that are just not scientifically true anymore. They may have been true at a certain time, but the knowledge of the science, because things move so quickly, they don't know. And there's not a safe place for them to go and learn this. Plus, Julia, they have 80,000 things that they do every single day. I just think sometimes we need to reimagine what politics looks like in government. Like, how can we have more machine learning input into our decision making? And then I think finally, just this may be an unexpected scientific loop into what we're doing. I just got off a session on the inner development goals. So what these are the goals about personal and inner development that many people believe, including myself, are fundamental to getting to the sustainable development goals. Like we have to understand ourselves from the inside in order to collectively work together to solve hard problems and to make that emerging future. And what we know is that stress is really bad on decision making. And a lot of decision making is around sort of adrenaline and cortisol. And we are like, we're machines, right? We're machines that have all of these things going in. And I do know that if we don't take care of the mental health and resilience of politicians, is what I'm obsessed about, but also just public servants, they're going to make bad decisions. There's just no doubt about it. And the science shows that, the neuroscience shows that. So I think a big movement we need to make is to really support the mindfulness, resilience building inside of governance, both politicians and public servants. And we're going to be doing a global scan of all the programs, practices around the world that politicians are currently using and developing some pilot programs. So if anyone's listening and has heard of, oh, this party in this place does this, or this group of politicians gets together to do that around the world, we want to hear that, because at a minimum, we want our politicians sort of fully, like with their full mind and body and heart, healthily making good decisions on behalf of us. I do think we need to think of a world past such emphasis on the individual making decisions. Like, how do we collectively make more decisions? What is the role of participatory governance on steroids? Like, we need more citizen juries. I just frankly, right now, I think a citizen jury in Germany on what to do about gas and oil prices right now going into winter would be a great thing to do alongside the leadership of Habeck. We need to have more inclusive sort of processes, but that can only happen if you have a leader that's so self-aware and so not into their own ego and so healthy of mind and clarity of mind to be able to even make that decision and listen to other people. So we're really doubling down on the neuroscience of good decision making and supporting politicians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I could, ask many questions about, each of the aspects that you've just been talking about. Leadership is one really important thing, but I was really highlighting the issue of mental health. And I think when people think about whether they want to engage in policy making, be an active policy, active politician, I think this issue of knowing that you'll be out there and you will be there and everyone can attack you for anything you're doing is really something that we underestimate. And it's great that you're working on this. So I really think, there needs to be also some sort of sense of, how can we really protect the people who are there to serve us and who are really there to serve the public good. So I think the work that you are doing there and the attention that you're really putting on this aspect is really, really crucial and very important. You have been, Lisa, you're from the US, you're working in Germany. I know you're also spending quite a bit of time in London and in other parts of the world. I'm thinking about, are there different ways of, linking science to policymaking, how policymakers actually react to scientists telling them things, in the different countries you're active in. I mean, we know all about the science or the administration under and previous president in the States, etc. But I was wondering whether you could give us your take on those different, contexts that you are observing also since a number of years already.
Yeah. I feel like my identity is completely uncertain these days in terms of like, what am I? Am I American? Am I European? I work globally. I would say though the common line through whether or not scientists are respected or not, and this is just my instinct, so it'd be interesting to look at research on this, is how much institutions are trusted or not. And I do think that the erosion of trust in institutions in general, whether that be our democratic structures or whether that be our scientific institutions, and many of those scientific institutions have taken a hit during COVID. I am just back from the US, and people who I would have never thought would have said, I'm never trusting the CDC anymore, which is our public health organization, is quite troubling to me. And I think this erosion of trust, part of it is deserved, but other has been a purposeful campaign to grab power by making us not trust the things that protect our democratic rights and values. So this is huge. This is really, really important. Science can be weaponized for good or bad. So what I wouldn't want people to say is always listen to scientists, because we know that, look, if you look at the IPCC reports, which is the big report around climate change, my God, were we distracted and arguing over that science for about 15 years too long? And there'll be, 99% of the scientists who say yes, and one scientist says no, and they can't move forward because the scientists don't agree. So this worshiping of science, I get a little like, whose science? Like, science has been used in eugenics, science has been used. So like with everything, you need to have a lens of who's behind it, is it really neutral, what's in the public interest, and really have that hat on going forward. So trust institutions and sort of who's behind it and using your judgment on which of the science. Just a little sub note, we've been looking a lot at, the United States have been looking a lot at the opioid crisis in the United States. And you could like trace it back to one scientific study that then brought the pain scale into the average doctor's sort of talk with their patient. And that one study was like funded by someone who was selling drugs in the pain area. So I just think politicians, policymakers, need to have like check what is the evidence base, but have some discernment around whose evidence is it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Lisa. We have been touching, really covering quite a bit of ground in this conversation, from building bridges to mental illnesses or mental health issues to the inner development goals and how they can really help us implement the SDGs, for instance, to how can we also protect our civil servants, how can we use science but not follow it blindly, which I think is a really important notion as well. And I would love to continue our discussion, but I'm afraid our minutes are over. So there's just one last question that I'm asking all my guests on this interview series. So how do you think, how can creative bureaucracy help overcome potential tensions between science and the political sector and policymakers? So what's the role of bureaucracy in this respect? How can creativity help here?
Well, I think one of the things we know is when we stay too much in our rational mind, it's hard to be quite open. And I just know through my work in adult learning and just sort of facilitation and bringing people together, when you get people in a co-creative space, right? Otto Scharmer talks about listening to debate all the way to listening for co-creation. And when you can give people kind of a shared problem where people bring their different perspectives to it and really create a container, encouraging that, listening for co-creation and working for co-creation, that can help. I find it very hard for people to really dislike each other once they are primed to solve problems together. And so I'd love to see actually at the upcoming festival some more simulations and case studies. We'd be very happy. We just ran one on what if politicians were replaced by AI. A city called Futureland has a 51% vote where the citizens have decided to kick out the politicians and replace them with AI. What happens next? How do you co-create a future of that and role play and understand the role of agile governance and citizens and democracy and scientists and lobbyists? So maybe there's just more that we can do to bring the different groups together to understand their different perspectives by actually taking on the role of the other person in some of these simulations. So let's have fun. Let's learn from each other and let's be creative and really celebrate good bureaucracy and good governance. We need to hold on to it and make it better right now.
Thanks very much. I love that we end on the notion of, having fun together and co-creating together. So thank you very much, Lisa. We'll definitely have fun and co-create together also for the festival next year. I look very much forward to this.
And Julia, thank you for your leadership. You're someone I look up to, I go to for advice. I'm really, really excited to see you shepherding a lot of these conversations, and I hope to hear more of your voice into the work that we're doing as well.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Goodbye.
Bye.